All right. So moving into the last question. Uh, it says, what are your thoughts around this statement? Identity is not enough. Community is an intentional process that cannot be assumed. It is something that you earn, that you build on, that you grow into, and that you practice. I know that each of you have kind of all sort of mentioned that in the first question. So if you can further like elaborate or just kind of have like final words on that, I'll start with RJ.
Sorry, we're trying to order food for tonight. That's an FYI for you too, Andy.
Thanks.
I know. I'm rereading the question because it takes me a while to.
It's all good. Take your time.
Maybe we should do Carrington and then me.
Are you okay
with from Lukayo?
Are you okay with that, Carrington?
Sure, I like being voluntold things.
I'm trying to confirm the food for tonight. That's why.
Okay.
Thank you, Carrington.
Yeah, no problem. I really like the question because I think just because we share an identity, it doesn't mean you're safe, right? And I don't mean like you, I just mean like just because we come from the same community, it doesn't mean you're actually community. Like sometimes those people who you share space with in ceremony or whatever are actually very dangerous or harmful or hurtful. And in fact, they're not safe. And you know, much like what RJ had said, and Lukayo, like you have to go out sometimes and find those things. And it can be hard if you are from, you know, a person of color or you're indigenous or whoever, and kind of feeling out of place, but you can very much intentionally find community and create community. And I think that's so important is because it lets people know that they have agency, that they can make their own decisions and decide who they want to be in their community, and that, you know, family isn't a right, it's a privilege. Just like community isn't a right, it's a privilege. It's an honor to be called someone else's community member and to be able to share space together in a way where you can be authentically yourself and not have to worry about how people are going to perceive you or treat you. So I think it's something that we have to work together if we want to see that solidarity. Start intentionally, you know, having more conversations like this when we can gather again, you know, having gatherings. And I'd really just love to see people sharing food together and talking. And I think something as simple as that is really going to be a space where we can start to see that community grow, and that we'll be able to go outside of our comfort zones. And that's where a lot of learning and joy is going to take place. So I look forward to that day happening. Well,
me too.
Be hungry. Thanks, RJ.
So I think a lot of the times when we say the word community, I think of people who are just having like groups of friends who kind of just want to go to brunch and have like potlucks with, but aren't willing to put work in around creating spaces of accountability. And I think community is a word that needs to be like rethought of and redefined, because a lot of the times, like, it's hard to create community spaces if there are folks a part of those spaces who are like unable or unwilling to be accountable when they've done wrong. And I think like a lot of the times in community spaces, like the reason why they fall apart so quickly is because of like the ways that we don't talk about like grief or sadness or allow those kinds of conversations. And I think a lot of the times, like, especially in communities that experience significant amounts of trauma, we see people continuously get into really like abusive patterns and taking that out on the people around them. And there's no protocol to have conversations or to hold people accountable, or how do we talk about those things? And I think that a lot of the time makes or breaks spaces. So when I think of folks who are like, yeah, they want the people to go to brunch, they want the people to have these potlucks, but they're not willing to like sit in circles to talk about when they've done wrong and harm and how do we move forward. So I think community is something that is actually a lot harder to get than what we think. And it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of like pain and being willing to meet people where they're at, which is also something that is hard to do and takes a lot of capacity. And I think too, like a lot of people don't think critically around like, yeah, we can talk about identity, we can talk about queer spaces, we can talk about indigenous spaces, but I've seen so many, even in indigenous and queer spaces, like communities fall apart because of conflict that could have been resolved if someone said they had hurt feelings. So I think it is something that has to be intentional. It is something that people have to be willing to be uncomfortable, and have others who are willing to like hold folks accountable. And if you're not able to do that, I think it's really easy for things to fall apart. And like from being in a lot of different spaces throughout my time of like being in only indigenous spaces and then in queer spaces and kind of like going into BIPOC spaces, like I've seen a lot of communities like fall apart because of conflict. And I think it's like it's scary, and it's a difficult process to go through, but it's also like worth it. And now there are like people in my circles who I'm like, yeah, like these are people I'm willing to have those tough conversations with, or people I'm willing to see like the not great sides of myself, because I think too, like social media tends to paint this picture of like people who have a lot of social capital of being perfect, and as if those people don't also experience conflict. So it's like, I know that as a person who like is in that situation where people are continuously being like, hey, like I know the work that you do, but it's like, yeah, but you know this like very particular version of what I want you to see online. You don't actually know who I am as a person. And the people I've chose to be in my circles are people who can see like all of those different sides of me and still love me and still show up for me, but are willing to be like, no, actually you've done something that is harmful. And I think that's what community is. And it needs to be earned. It needs to be like built on. It's something that you have to like mourn into. It's not easy. Like also like in general, like sharing grief with other people or even crying in front of people, it's difficult. It's not easy. So I think it's crucial. I mean, like, I strongly believe that at some point climate change is going to affect all of us, and we need to learn these really important values around community before that, because if we're going to be at some point creating communities and communes that are going to have a lot of different people in it, and it's going to be more around survival, I think this is like an important piece of that. And I think that, again, all of these things I feel are intrinsic in my art. And yeah, there are times where I'm a really difficult person to talk to, but also like I need to be willing to be accountable and do that self-reflection myself. I'm not always an easy person to talk to about conflict, but I also know that there are people in my life who like love me, and I know I have the tools and the people in my life who I'm able to kind of get to those places. So I think, again, like community is difficult. It's not as easy as just going to brunch and having potlucks with people, but I see like people creating spaces like that. But the second there's a conflict, those potlucks stop happening, and so do those brunches. So I think beyond that, we need to create spaces that are sustainable and we can have the tough conversations. And I feel like this is like all of the things that I've learned around like these conversations definitely come from knowledge from Lukayo. So I'm excited to hear what they have to say next. Yeah, everything that mostly everyone in Ottawa knows always leads back to Lukayo.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true. Thank you, RJ, for that humble answer. I think that's part of what's required of community is humility, especially in terms of resolving any kind of conflict. So thank you for that. And yes, thank you, Lukayo, for literally, giving us all of the tools to really do this kind of work and to articulate, the things that we're going through in a way that's, calling in as opposed to calling out. And with that, you can wrap up the questions.
Oh my God.
wait, before you do that, I also want to acknowledge that my kid is named after Lukayo.
Oh my, what is this?
Because they've just been such a really important person. Maybe not as close, and maybe not without them knowing, but yes, very important. And
Solidarity requires consent. And
I remember telling you, and you were like, "What? When did this happen? What happened?"
when did this happen? Anyways, oh man.
You know when this happened? 5 years ago, because I was 5.
Oh man, I was like, if I had not gone to Toronto, I could be in this commune. No, I'm enjoying my commune as well. I mean, except for the conflict that is forcing everyone to move. So, so like the statement really hits me very personally right now as I'm working through, trying to think about all the lessons of why the community house that I moved into a year ago is not working. And a lot of that is kind of trying to understand what is the despite how intentional I try to set things up, it's also a process of everybody being ready. And there was a constant pattern also of me being over responsible for other people, which is something that I have to reflect on. As much as people praise me for a lot of the things that that people love about me in the community, it also is very destructive to me in that I overcommit, I overwork, and I'm over responsible around other conflict that's happening because I understand the privilege of the education that I have from the elders and the other activists that have supported in teaching me about transformative and restorative justice. But then also I have my own trauma. I have my own childhood trauma where I'm always trying to save the marriage of my parents and of all of the elders and adults around me. And so we're getting personal here. But for me, community is personal. And so even if I was ready and people thought that they were ready, folks were actually not ready. And no matter how much I grieve about that or try to blame myself or fall into a deep depression, be like, I'm a fraud, no one should ever believe me when I talk about community. It's also just like human beings are unpredictable and messy. And when you're trying to build solidarity and consent, it can't be real if they don't have the option of withdrawing consent. And sometimes it looks like this. It looks like my house disbanding and me having to find a place during pandemic and a lot of grief because for the dream to be real, people have to be able to withdraw consent. Sometimes there can only be spaces where Black folks can't have non-Black people there, where Indigenous folks can't have non-Indigenous folks there, where we need to be in our own spaces. And those spaces are also spaces of contention for folks who are from multiple communities, who are mixed, and being like, where do I go when healing needs to take place, where my face might trigger something from these other folks, and which was also what was happening in the household, where white folks and Black folks and brown folks had to deal with all of these other racial triggers despite all of the intentionality we put into this. And so my thoughts on the statement is 200% identity is not enough, and that I am completely irritated with the term identity politics. I don't like also how people use it to demean like solidarity making or coalition building, which I think is like a better term because it implies consent. But I definitely believe that it's not enough, and that when we're not focusing on building coalitions and we're focusing on identities, it becomes easily oppression Olympics. It becomes like, and it leads deeply into how we like to cancel each other and in punitive ways when, for me, and I don't know if it's an unpopular or controversial opinion, but cancel culture should be used for folks who are in power, and we can't rely on the justice system to hold them accountable. So this is why we do this, right? But when we use it on each other, and it's like, what are you going to gain from outing this marginalized mother of a single mom of 2 kids, or for this person or that person, what does it gain? The little like capital they have, or social capital, or their arts business on the side to just destroy and boycott. Like, how does that build coalitions between our people when you call that out instead of sending them a message and trying to have those hard conversations? And so now I'm just like, from the political standpoint, then how do I bring that to the interpersonal in this community process, which is still political, personal is political, etc., where I'm just like, we're going to disband. Is there any way for the reparations to be done between our groups? And like, what does it mean, mostly in the white folks in the house, which I've asked them, what does it mean to be in solidarity with us? And do they understand what that means? And what does it mean in our relationship to them? So it is something that you earn and build on and grow, and I want to keep doing it. And part of it is also failing, and that sometimes you set the ground and you set the water and you set the sunlight, but the seed still won't grow, and it's not ready to sprout. It's not time. The creator says no thanks, and so you just have to keep trying. And even as I'm in deep grief, in the process of grief, I will still always believe in the intentional process community. I'm still going to keep trying with all of the tools and gifts. I'm only the product of all of the teachings of the various communities that have seen something in me. And so when people, I just wanted to address all the compliments that got. I accept the compliments. That's what my counselor says I should do. Thank you. And then I also want to say that when I hear it, I feel like this is what it means for me to pay forward every gift that was given to me from my elders and other activists. I'm trying to make Andi cry, and it's working. And so like, and so I'm doing well what Creator asked me to do, and which is what community is, that we keep paying it forward and we keep reaching out to each other and building that reciprocity. And so I'm grateful that folks felt touched by my work, but know that it isn't me. I'm just a channel for the rest of community, for all of the communities that take care of me and support me. And I hope to be that channel and that container for the rest of you as well. Maraming salamat. Gugurang mabalus.